numbers from the unit circle, which coordinate is x and which one's y?
The bottom one is y.
X is first.
But cosine and sine, sorry. Okay, so the x is the cosine, right? And the y value is sine. Now, if what I had planned yesterday, but things change, right, is I had planned for you guys to measure the distance of each angle. So we're talking about cosine, which is our x, right? How far, what I would have had you do yesterday is I'd have you measure how far this point is along the x-axis. So cosine, you would measure how far the x distance is away. Then you'd measure pi fourths. Then you'd measure pi thirds. Okay? And you'd measure pi halves. Well, how far is pi halves from this? It's on it, right? Then you'd measure this distance and you do all of that. And that creates the cosine function, which you guys have already made. I didn't make you do that today, okay? So if you measured, but that's what all of these lines are from, okay? Is if you measured how far it is along the x-axis, you would get all of these lines, okay? And then sine, if you measured how far it is along the y-axis, that's where you would get all of these measurements, okay? Which is how far is 0 from the x-axis. Well, hold on, let me go back. So how far is 0 up or down on the y-axis? What is the y distance? 0, right? Because it's not up or down any, which is why the sine graph, if you go back, sorry, I'm going back and forth, which is why the sine graph starts at 0. Okay? So this is what you need to know. Go to page 45 and let's add 2 more things at the bottom here. Girls?
Yes, I think that's
So if we add, these are the parent functions for sine and cosine. So sine is y equals a times the sine of bx plus k. That's the parent function formula for sine. And then for cosine, it's the exact same, except you have cosine of bx plus k. And if you want to bold those, highlight them, okay? Because that's where all of this other stuff comes into play. When it mentions k, listen please, when it mentions k and a and b, it's from this part of the equation, okay? So let's do an example. So we're going to start on page 46 on sine function. So this is 46, and write sine function at the top. Okay? So this is what a sine function looks like, the parent function. When there's no shifts, it's nothing at all. This is the original sine function, okay? Raya? Why don't you let me move you? Okay, one more time I'm moving you, okay? So the sine function always starts at the middle of the wave, or the midline, okay? And then it always ends at the middle. All right? So go ahead and write this formula again, and then you can just write this equation. You don't need to write the instructions, okay? So write all that stuff below your graph.
Wait, I identify the amplitude.
You do not have to write that part. Number 1 and this again. Okay, first thing that we're going to talk about is the amplitude. Now, you wrote on page 45 that the amplitude is what? Half the difference between the max and the min. So, and looking at the equation, the amplitude is always the number in front of sine or in front of cosine. So the amplitude, we're going to write this below, and it's always the absolute value of that number. So if it happens to be negative, it will always be a positive, okay? So what's the absolute value of? The number in front of sine is 2. So the absolute value of a positive 2 is just 2. So that will be the height of each wave from the midline, James. And then the period of the function is how long it is before it repeats itself. So the period, and what we wrote on page 45, was 2 pi over the absolute value of b. That's the formula you will always use, okay? And b is always, if you look up here, it's multiplying to the x after the sine or cosine. So what is multiplying to the x after the sine or cosine? 3 pi. So then we are going to go 2 pi divided by the absolute value of 3 pi. Well, the absolute value of 3 pi, since it's positive, will just stay positive. So that's just 2 pi over 3 pi. And what will happen? What can we, the pi's will divide out. So then a period of this function is just 2/3. Okay? So every 2/3 on the x-axis, it will repeat. That's what that means. Next thing is the midline. And the midline's easy because it's always the number being added or subtracted. Okay? Either, most of the time it's at the end, but sometimes it may be at the beginning of the function. Okay? But that's going to be the -1. So the -1 is the middle of our wave, and the maximum height of our sine wave, and this is where we wrote k plus a on page 45. So k is the midline, so that's -1, plus a is the amplitude. What's the amplitude? 2. So what is -1 plus 2? +1. And then we wrote on page 45, the minimum point is k minus a. So then the minimum will be k, which is our midline, minus the amplitude, -3. So the highest point on the y-axis that our sine wave reaches is 1. The lowest point is -3. So these two things will tell you how to label the y-axis, because that's the max and the min on the y-axis, okay? So now let's sketch one period of the graph. That's all that we're going to sketch on our notes and on our assignment today. So let's graph the y-axis. We just need to go from -3 to +1. And then make our x-axis. Yep, we're still on page 46, just anywhere you can fit it.
Is there anything else that we'll need to know?
Nope, there's nothing else. This will be the last thing. Okay, so there's our max and our min. We've labeled that. Next thing you want to label is the period of the function. And the period is 2/3. So I'm just going to go over, and it can be however far I want to make it. You'll see why in a minute. I'll show you. So I'm going to say, okay, this is where it will end, like the one wave, and I'm going to label this 2/3. Okay? And if I label that 2/3, you need to do half of that distance. Always do half. So it's half of 2/3. 1/3. Right? Half of 2/3 is 1/3. Now, what does our sine function, if you look at the parent function, where did it start? At 0, which was the midline. So we always start the midline, and what happened halfway? halfway it went back to the midline, right? And where did it end? At the midline. So sine function will always do that. Starts at the midline, middles at the midline, and ends at the midline for each wave. Okay? So where's our midline for this example? Where's the midline? -1. So we're going to start at -1 on the y-axis. Okay? And it will, the sine function always starts and goes up unless it has a negative. If it has a negative out in front, then it will be reflected and go down first. Okay? So if that's a -2, it will go down first instead of up first. Okay? So we're going to go, oh, wait, halfway will be at the midline again, right? So halfway will be at -1 again, and it will end at -1. Okay, now between, if you notice on our parent function, halfway between the start and the halfway point, so 1/4 of the way, it reaches the maximum height. Do you see that? So then we need it with our maximum height that we said was +1. So halfway between the start and the halfway, it will be the maximum height. Then halfway between the 1/3 and 2/3 will be at the minimum point of -3. And then there's all the points that we need to draw our sine curve. So the amplitude is just the height from the midline to each max or min. So that's why the amplitude is 2. So we don't really need to label the amplitude on the graph. Okay? Yep. So that's all you need to do is just draw. Yep. Okay, so we figured out amplitude, period, midline, max, min, and then we can draw the graph. Now let's do a cosine. Just where they start and end is all. So this is on 47, right? Right, cosine function. Now, where does the cosine function start? At the highest point, right? And then it hits the lowest point halfway, and then it ends at the highest point. Okay? Whereas sine always starts at the midline. So go ahead and write this again, the a cosine bx plus k, and then write this example. You don't need to write the words. Okay?
Wait, am I supposed to write that one up there?
No, just this and that one. Okay.
So we don't have any homework?
No, we'll start the assignment and then I'll let you finish it tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so first thing first. Let's figure out, listen please, let's figure out the amplitude. The amplitude is the absolute value of the number in front of cosine. So what's the absolute value of -5? +5. Okay, because that means you can never have a negative height, because that's referring to the height of each wave, okay? And then, let's see what's next. We did period. It's always 2 pi over the absolute value of b. And b is always multiplying to the x. So b is this 1/2. So what is 2 pi divided by the absolute value of 1/2? Well, 1/2's positive, so we can just not worry about the absolute value part. But what's 2 pi divided by 1/2? What do you do when you divide fractions? Copy? Dot, flip. So we're going to copy 2 pi, we're going to put dot, and we're going to flip 1/2. So when we flip 1/2, it'll be 2/1, because I'm just writing it as a fraction. So then what's 2 pi divided by 1/2? Or how many 1/2s are in 2? 4. So it'll be 4 pi is one period of our function. Okay, so it repeats every 4 pi. Let's see, what did we do next? Midline. Midline is what's being added or subtracted. It is the 3, so that's where the middle of our wave will be. Maximum is the midline plus the amplitude. So the midline is 3 plus the amplitude, which we had was a positive 5. So it will always be a positive number that you add there. And let me go down a little bit. What's the minimum? Is 3 minus 5, so it'll be negative 2. So 8 is the maximum point that it reaches, and the lowest point is negative 2. And that will tell us how to label which axis? The y-axis, okay? So now what you need to do is you need to go from negative 2 to 8 on the y-axis. Okay, what was the next thing we labeled? Do you guys remember what I said to label? And it can be however far you want it to be. Yeah. Period. Right? So I'm going to say, okay, about this far would be 4 pi. It can be whatever you label it as, okay? But we do need to know halfway. So what's half of 4 pi? 2 pi. So we can go right in the middle is 2 pi. And then you need to know, okay, this is a cosine function. It always starts at the maximum unless it's been reflected. Does this have a negative? Yes. So instead of starting at the maximum point, like our parent function starts at the maximum point up here, it's going to start at the minimum and be just flipped. So then what?
Is it only if there's a negative on the first number?
Yes. If there's a negative on the B, it doesn't matter. It's only right at the beginning, so the A. Okay, so we're going to start at the minimum point, which is negative 2, right? And halfway the cosine reaches either the max or the min, depending on where it started, right? So if it started at the min, it's going to reach its max at halfway. So at 2 pi, that's really not split in half, is it? Whatever, it's close enough. So then halfway at 2 pi, it'll reach the maximum of 8. And then it will end, the one full wave, it will end back down at the minimum. Okay? And halfway between each of those, it will be at the midline, which is at 3, in case you want to put those. Otherwise, then you can just draw your cosine wave that we have. No, you do not have to with the cosine. Okay, oh, there's one more thing I forgot to have you guys write, and this is really important. And it will help you a lot, okay? Cosine starts at maximum unless what? Unless it's reflected or has the negative. You can put either one. So cosine starts at the minimum point unless it's reflected. Did I say minimum? I'm sorry. Okay. Does everyone have that written down? And then sine, I forgot to write on this previous page, you guys. I'm sorry. It's been a long day, you know. You guys probably know. Then on sine, we can write sine starts where? Yep, starts at midline. And it is only, when it's reflected, that's when it goes down. Okay? At the maximum. Okay, so cosine starts at maximum unless it's reflected, it's opposite. Sine starts at midline, and we can say and goes up unless reflected. Sorry, if you have room, write this. So sine starts at midline and goes up unless it's reflected, okay? So now we have like 9 minutes. So let's do 1 or 2 problems on our assignment, and tomorrow in class you can finish it. Sound good? Okay, I've passed out lined notebook paper for everyone, and then this half sheet. So everyone grab 1 lined notebook paper. And the half sheet of paper. Okay, hold on. Okay, everyone write number 1 on your lined notebook paper, please. Write the equation for number 1. Brendan, what did I just ask?
Write number 1 on your line.
Okay, please do that.
Do we have to write the problem too, or just
Write the problem, please. Okay, so on your assignment, you are going to find the same things that we found in our notes, and then you are going to sketch just one wave of the graph, okay? So, what's the amplitude? What number is multiplying in front of the sign? Of 1, right? If there's not a number there, it will always be 1. So the absolute value of 1 is just 1. The period is always 2 pi over the absolute value of b. And b is always multiplying to the x. It's between sine and the x. So what is it? It's 1, right? So 2 pi divided by the absolute value of 1 is just 2 pi. Right? Questions so far?
Yeah, how did you get the 1?
Because the number multiplying to the x is just this invisible 1. If there's not a number there, it's always 1. Okay? And then, let's see, midline. Midline is the 2. So, because it's been shifted up 2, which makes the maximum point what? 2 plus the 1. 2 plus the amplitude. So that'll be 3. The minimum point will be 2 minus 1, which is 1. Okay, and that tells you how to label what? The y-axis, right? So everyone label it on your own. Label the y-axis here. And then remember the x-axis, just go out to however far you want. It can be however far you want on the x-axis. Okay? Okay, remember, y-axis from 1 to 3. So I need to have the x-axis, and my y-axis, I need to go up to 3. Right?
Yeah.
And then my x-axis, I do need to label 1 period of the graph will be what? One period is how far? 2 pi. So you can label it however far you want, okay? But I just do about this far. Okay, that way it's not so squished. But anyways, 2 pi. And what's half of 2 pi? 1 pi. So always do half of your distance. And then remember, sine starts at midline or max? Midline. So sine starts at the midline, and in the middle it hits the midline, and at the end it hits the midline. So that's sine is where you'll make 3 points. Beginning, middle, and end at your midline. So what's our midline at? 2. So it starts at 2, and the middle or halfway It hits 2 again, and then it will end at the 2. Well, no, it ends back up at the midline. Okay? So it starts at midline, halfway it hits it, and at the end it hits it. Now, is this sine function going to go up first or down first? Up, because there's not a negative, right? So we're going to go up to 3, because that's our maximum point it hits. We're going to go down to 1
Teachers, please excuse the interruption.
here.
The Interact Club members to come to the front foyer at this time. Interact Club members to the front foyer at this time. Thank you.
And there's our beautiful sine graph. Questions on that one? Because she was awesome. That's why she was. Okay, should we do one more? Cosine? Let's do cosine real quick. Okay, how about we do 8? Okay, number 8. I know we're skipping around. Sorry if that bothers anybody. Okay, so let's see how fast we can do this while still understanding it. Amplitude is the absolute value of what number? Absolute value of negative 3, which is a positive 3. James, you should be sitting down. Thank you. Period is 2 pi over the absolute value of b. What is multiplying to the x? 2 pi. So it'll be 2 pi divided by the absolute value of 2 pi. So what is it going to be? Just 1. No pi. It'll just be 1 on the x-axis, every 1 unit. Midline. Do we have a number being added or subtracted anywhere in our function? Nope. Not 1. Midline, if there's nothing there, it's 0. Because there's nothing. Because what if I put a plus 0 there? It'd be the same function, right? So the midline is 0, which makes the maximum and our minimum our amplitude. Positive 3 and a negative 3. So that's what we need to label our y-axis from negative 3 to positive 3. And then 1 period of the function is just what? What do I label this? 1 and half of 1. It's 1/2. And then you need to think, okay, this is a cosine function, so where do cosine functions start? They always start at the max unless it's been reflected. Has this one been reflected? Yes, because of the negative. So we're actually going to start at the minimum point, which is our negative 3, and we're going to end at the minimum point. And then what else do we know about cosine? Halfway, it's at the max, right? The opposite of where it starts. So that's not half either. Oh, I'm terrible. That's going to... Anyway, so halfway it'll be at the maximum point of positive 3. Okay? And that's really all you need for cosine is just those 3 points. And just make it look like a wave. Okay? Because after that it repeats, but we're only sketching 1 period. I think they're really the same. You just need to know which one starts where. All right, go ahead and clean up, and tomorrow in class we'll finish this. Perfect time.